Hello and welcome to the People Podcast, brought to you by Blue Communications, a podcast where we speak to marine and renewable energy experts to share their career stories while talking about challenges and issues in our industries. I'm your host, Emily Dove, and in this episode, I speak to Louise Sara, a highly decorated woman in shipping, currently serving as Director Maritime Standards at Carnival. Her impressive career spans more than 20 years at sea, starting her career with P&O Cruises and Ferries, serving different roles as Senior Master, Fleet Manager for Safety, and now serving with Carnival. Louise holds many other roles, such as Trustee on the Merchant Navy Welfare Board, Liveryman at the Honourable Company of Master Mariners. You will realise when listening to this episode why Louise was also awarded the Merchant Navy Medal by HRH the Princess Royal at Trinity House in 2024. For her outstanding contributions and services to welfare, safety, and inclusion within the maritime industry. And her dedication and leadership is truly inspiring. I had the pleasure of meeting through Wister UK, which is a network, organisation, and community that attracts and supports women in shipping. We quickly bonded over our shared passions of communications, recruitment, and allyship. Let's jump straight in. Louise, thank you so much for joining me today. It would be so interesting to hear and to share with our listeners what first attracted you to the maritime industry and how you first began your career.
Hi, Emily. Thank you so much. And thanks for the fantastic introduction. It made me sound like a bit of a superwoman. My fascination with the sea. Well, let's get there. Because when I I was always fascinated. When I was growing up, my dad was talking about his career in the Merchant Navy, and he was at sea as an engineer. So he was with P&O Princess Cruises during his career. And growing up, I heard about all these fantastic places he went to, Acapulco. I mean, he just used to talk about it with so much passion, and he absolutely loved his job. He loved the maritime industry and the community around it. And so I was just really lucky. I was about 9 years old, and I went on not a cross-channel ferry, a red funnel ferry that went to the Isle of Wight. So we were just on a day out to see my auntie over there. And he had a officer that was in one of his classes at Warsash Maritime College, which is where he was lecturing at the time. And he was lecturing the mates and masters engineering courses. So he had some deck officers in the class there. And so we went up to the bridge to meet a lady called Wendy. And she was just such an inspiration. And she has been and still is like an incredible role model in this industry for me today, because she's also done it all. She's got to captain, she's run, senior roles in businesses outside of maritime, and then she went back to sea. And she also had a family as well. And I was thinking, if she can do it, then I can do it. And I think that's where my fascination started, because it made me feel like, this woman, she looked, she had long hair, she looked a bit like me, and I was sort of 9. So you're quite impressionable at that age. And I think that's where you sort of find those role models that sort of inspire you to get to that point in life where, to achieve those goals in life. So I went to sea in 2000. I went to university first. I studied business and law. And then I went to sea in 2000, and I joined P&O Cruises as a deck cadet. And because I was joining at 21, I was classed as what they class as an older cadet now. But as the industry's evolved over the last 25 years, you see that we get cadets of all ages now. But generally, my intake was around 16 to 18 years old, and I was quite old compared to them. So that was interesting. It was like going back, because going back to school, you had to wear uniform again, and it was strange experience having been at university. I was in an intake of around 42 cadets for P&O Cruises, and that was deck and engine. They were split around all the colleges around the UK. So at the time we were using Warsash, Glasgow, and South Shields. And I was one of 2 girls that joined that intake. So and the other lady's still at sea at the moment as well. So we both managed to keep our careers at sea going. And we both have families as well, which is quite interesting. During my cadetship, it's a mix. So the way the UK cadetship works, we do time at college and then time at sea. So I was really lucky. My first 6 weeks at college, I covered all the basic courses and sort of life-saving, personal safety, things like that. And then headed off to sea for my first trip. And my first trip took me down to the Caribbean for a couple of months. So After that, I came back for Christmas, and then I went back on a world cruise on Oriana. I did a second world cruise in Oriana after another sea phase, but you're balancing like the 3-year cadetship between time at sea and time in college, basically learning the skills that you need at sea. And then the skills we learn at sea is kind of quite interesting, because you go from everything from maintenance work, rope work, LSA maintenance, or sorry, I should say life-saving appliance maintenance, firefighting appliance maintenance. You cover everything. And then as you move through, you then get into the watchkeeping, steering certification, learning the collision regulations and sort of how to avoid traffic, properly without, causing any accidents. Yeah, it's quite an interesting role, and it's very varied, covering subjects from meteorology to cargo, loading hazardous cargo. That's quite interesting, because that gets into sort of like that piece around sort of chemistry, sort of what mixes, what doesn't, what you can put next door to each other. That was more when I went into the ferries stage. But yeah, that was my first few years of coming into the industry.
And that must have been such a transition as well, because you made the decision to go to university. And I think for most people, that's where you really do learn to become more independent. And then it almost then got flipped on you to then go back into a place where I assume it's quite regimented in a way, very structured. You've got a strong routine and you have to follow orders. And the fascination, I imagine, as well, of traveling the world and seeing all these new cultures, experiencing new cuisines and seeing, different life that's beyond, just the UK borders. That's so fascinating. And I guess also being in such a varied role and just learning from so many people. I assume there was quite a lot of people also working with you on board these vessels that you started on. How was that culture then as well, of working in those teams, as it were, and constantly, considering the different variation of role that you had to have?
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting, actually, because I think one of the points I was going to come to later was that part of the teamwork piece is that you work with different people all the time, and the crews are constantly changing on the ship. So when you change one or two people within a team, that can change the whole dynamic of how the team work. And so there's a lot of, stepping back, taking an overview before stepping in again, and sort of, to make sure that you can get that team to work as well as possible together. And I definitely learned that when I got to sort of senior master level, and how to manage those resources around people working together. Yeah, it's been interesting. And like it's also like one of the things I found a lot of the time I was sailing as a sole female within the teams that I was in. We are different, we're built slightly differently, we think slightly differently as women, and we have great energy, but sometimes you're trying to fit into a team, especially as a junior officer. I did find at times, you kind of accept the banter and put up with it a little bit, because you don't want to create any waves. You want to get on with your career as well. And I realize now going forward, and I think also things have changed with the way the new generations are coming through. They're a lot more open to sort of speaking up and saying that's not appropriate. But I think at the time I was, one of very few women in the industry when I started, and I didn't feel comfortable. So I put up with an awful lot. But that's also why it's important to have networks outside of the ship that they're on, so that we're on, so we can have other people to talk to and say, has this happened to you, how did you deal with it, those sort of things, and create those connections that sort of help us get through. But our teams, Carnival, where I work now, the teams are a lot more mixed and diverse. We've got a huge number of nationalities in our teams, varied levels of experience from different areas of the industry as well that are coming into our team. So I think the culture on board the ships is incredibly, it's sort of improved more over the years, because it's just that there's a better dynamic and more engaged teams.
Absolutely. And you raise such a valid point of that power of communications and community. And like you said, if I think a lot of people have experienced, and especially in their younger careers, that difficulty of trying to fit in and stay true to yourself and your own morals, but also standing up for yourself and for others where you feel something is not right, but having those outsiders as well, and communicating with them and learning from other people's experiences. That's why it's so important to be communicating and listening to people. And I did want to ask you, actually, what would you say were the kind of the core elements that you learnt during those first few years, and especially as a woman, you know, what were the core things that you maybe learnt about in terms of leadership and, you know, being in a position of, okay, I am the minority here, but what am I going to do about it?
There's a few things, and some of them take longer to learn. So, I mean, obviously, initially as a sort of more junior officer and sort of in a more operational role with a team that you're working with all the time, you really do learn how to be a team, you know, how to work with the team. I think teamwork is really important, especially when you're dealing with operations and it's around ship safety. You're getting the ship from A to B. I mean, this is really key. When I was on the cross-channel ferries, we were doing, you know, hour and a half crossings across the Dover Straits and then 45-minute turnarounds in port, and there's no time to drop the ball, and so everyone has to work together. And so the huge bit around teams for me was, you know, there's a lot around managing expectations, looking at the team sometimes, and you do get weaker people in the team, but it's not about dismissing them as weaker people. It's about bringing them into the team and finding their strengths. And I got a great example. I had one officer that was at sea for about 40 years. He was like a career second officer, and he just was quite happy just doing that job. He never was going to get, you know, he was never keen on being captain. He didn't want to go any further, but he was a great person for like training anyone that came into the ship, as you know, even if they came in at a more senior rank. But if you want to know how to drive the ship across the Dover Straits or load the ship in port, then that person was your man for getting, you know, that training piece done initially to show them exactly what they needed to do on a day-to-day basis. Other areas, well, leadership, that's developed, and that's constantly developed all the way through being, you know, an officer through to captain. And I was lucky. I started when I did my degree, because it was business and law. We covered things like organizational behavior and human resource management, which gave me quite early skills in understanding sort of the behavioral needs of people and how people like act and react. I think some of the most important things I learned around that is everyone's got their own pet. I'm trying to think. My pet hates. It's not the word. This is not the word I'm looking for. But everyone's got something, and it might be minutiae to the bigger picture of what's being like you need to achieve. But until you get those bits sorted out, you can't operate as a team. And so it's very much of the O's and the I's of the organisation versus the individual. But to get the team to work and go into that sort of like storming phase, you need to deal with the individual elements first. And yeah, I think a lot of the time as well, listening to the crew, listening to what they want, but also enabling them as well to speak up and find routes to solve their problems. Because frequently you get these, you know, I used to get this, well, we keep saying that you need to do it like this. I'm like, but who are you telling? You know, and a lot of the time they weren't telling the right people or speaking to the right people to get their points across and be heard. So I think there's a lot, you know, that I learned over the years. One of the biggest things with leadership, and I think this is where I changed, I was very much like going back to what I said at the beginning about fitting in with the environment I was in. I realized quite early on as the captain that I needed to be myself and bring my whole self to work and be very authentic. And so that did mean being a lot more feminine around the way I led the ship. And it just proved that you don't have to go in hard or as a bossy or a aggressive person. You don't have to shout. You can be sort of quietly confident, and you can sort of own the team that you're working with sort of quiet authority and sort of more soft leadership skills. So I definitely found that was like a big thing. And then by doing that, I think the environment was a lot better. There was a slightly flatter authority gradient on the bridge for like just general operations. Obviously there's times, you know, that you have to lift that grade, you know, that authority level. So you're, you know, in an emergency or sort of a heightened level of operations where you've got strong winds in, you know, when you're driving in and out of port and you've got quite strong winds to deal with, you know, there is a change in that authority gradient. But by keeping a very open environment on the bridge and within my team, and I still do this now with the team that I work with ashore, it does enable them to speak up and they feel confident and comfortable to ask any questions. And I'll do my best to try and resolve them. I don't know everything, but I will try and lead them down the right direction. So yeah, I think that's probably the most things. The other thing I was going to say, and I know that, like, one of the things talked about is things don't happen overnight, and it's a big thing. It's like, you know, the ship operates all the time, but there's just things going on in the background, and sometimes you just have to be patient to enable that change to happen. And it's one of those big things that I sort of wanted to get to and talk to about, like, because I'm always racing, like, to try and get things done. I can achieve a huge load, but sometimes that next stage doesn't happen very quickly. And I have learned to be incredibly patient and just wait and process these things the right way to make sure I get to the end goal. But that comes down to a bit more strategy planning.
It's such a great point you raised, because also we all have different personality traits, and naturally I'm also someone that, you know, would prefer to just get the job done.
Yeah.
And sometimes I need to remember, okay, no, there's a process here, and I need to reflect and remember that I need some more patience at times. But it's having that blend, and like you said, it's understanding other people's behavioral patterns too, understanding their natural personality traits as well, and blending all of that together and having then that assessment of, how do I now approach this? How do we as a collective and a team approach this? So it's so important. Again, it links back to that communicating and listening part. And I know for you, you're a mentor to so many people. And I know we've spoken before about some of the allies and mentors that you've had in your career as well. Is there anyone or any few people you'd want to highlight as well, maybe from, those early days, the importance of having an ally and, support system around you, especially when, at sea, but then also how that kind of then moved across when you then became more on shore and taking on that role, and, maybe the interlink between the two, points.
Yeah, I've been lucky actually with allies, and having good mentors. And I think the key turning area for me on the mentorship piece was when I was doing my trainee master's portfolio. I was quite a new master. I think I just got my master's ticket, and we start working towards portfolio when I was at P&O Ferries, and it was quite, you'd have to get 2 sets of senior masters to sign off that portfolio as you go. And there was a lot of time spent with them mentoring and talking through their experiences. So I really started to understand that power of mentoring, but also they became allies to me, and allies that are also now friends. Now I'm not in that environment on board the ship, but I'm still in contact with 2 of the senior masters that had huge roles in getting me to be in command and getting me through my pilot exemption certificates. And they were brilliant, because it wasn't just on the work scale. When I was going through my divorce, they actually were huge supports for just listening to me before we got on with the job for the week. But so the ferry's a week on, week off. But I come in from home, like from my week at home, and I would just have like that half an hour to vent to one of them, in the office, and then we'd be like, now let's get on with the week's work. So it's kind of like, it's just was that ability to be able to talk, and they wouldn't say anything really much about the situation, but they were just there to listen, and it's just quiet support. Also, then when I was senior master, or even when I moved away from that ship as a captain and was on a different ship, they were the people that I could call in the middle of the night on another ship and go, hey, this has just happened, like, what would you do about it? If there was a situation on board that was sort of unusual, something that was rumbling around with the crew, has that happened to you? Got anything going on there? It was just having those people that I could turn to that had my back, but also would bash it out. Incredibly, there was also like an area of reverse, like mentoring and allyship, that came out of that as well, because quite frequently they would also call me and say, like, what would you do about that, Lou? Have you got a way that you would deal with that? So it's kind of like showed that mutual respect that I gained eventually going through that process, and it was incredible. From that, I really learned that, like, improving a network of people, and having a bit like a wider net of people to fish from for experience is really helpful.
You're the one that's asking all the questions. You're the one that's, going to others for support. But then it shifts, because you build respect, you build trust across your teams. People then come to you for advice. People come to you for that support, and for you to be their support system. And, that started happening in my career now too. And I just think, wow, I've been looking at these people, I've been seeking mentors. Now I'm becoming a mentor. And I think it's so important for us all to work on that, and to recognize I've been a mentor. No, I've had a mentor, and now I need to be that mentor. And it's something that no one can do for us, but we all need to really recognize it. Even if you're doing it just within your company, that's wonderful, and that's so important to do. And naturally, I think a lot of us do it without realizing, but I think take time to really reflect on that. And there are other associations, like you've said, There's ones like Women in Transport, that build these support systems and can enable you to link up with mentors and mentees. There is so much happening in our industry, and it's so transformative in itself. And we're definitely taking learnings, I know, from other sectors, and then from those within that are leading at the forefront, like yourself and with Carnival. And I know for the both of us as well, there's a big point around retaining people and how we can improve that. And when we had the opportunity with Worcester UK to meet the Lady Mayoress of London, and we went to Mansion House, and we all sat together on almost a round table for a lunch, and we heard from Lucy, who was commenting on, when women finish serving in the Navy, they're unaware of the opportunities available to them still within their sector. Yes, it's slightly different, but it's all within the maritime industry, and they don't quite realize how their skill set from working at sea, working with the Navy, can be moved across into this broad sector that they actually already know quite well. And I think we need to, and I know you echo this call in supporting people and understanding how their skill sets can, go from being at sea to onshore roles, or what other opportunities are out there, and ensuring we can retain people. I know this is something that's really close to your heart as well.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things there. I think we'll just start with the piece around Lucy, and that was a fantastic lunch. I mean, what an honour to be invited out. And the Lady Mayoress, she's just absolutely brilliant, wasn't she? Really fascinating, and really was driving everything in the same sort of direction that we were talking about. I think it's really key, and a lot of this comes down to obviously the companies. Now, I can speak from like Carnival UK's. They've got a veterans network, and they actually work quite closely with the armed forces and show them what opportunities there are ship and shore within Carnival UK once someone decides to come ashore. So there's networks in place, but it's almost like a call to action here, isn't it? It's actually saying to companies that there are transferable skills that can be used within your company. You got security skills, IT skills, I'm trying to think, navigational skills if it's from the right, it's all there, engineering skills. And we do take on, and there's ways of coming into the industry with like maritime and the deck and technical skills, and transferring those certifications across to merchant navy. So that's been happening for years, but it just needs to be heard about more. And it really then would come down to companies to really enforce that. From the Merchant Navy Training Board's point of view, they're actually doing a huge campaign at the moment for just generally in terms of career at sea and recruiting from bottom up. So that's worth looking at. And then if we come to the retention piece, and I think specifically for me, and I can talk about it from my experiences as a woman having a family, it is really difficult to juggle that. And you come to this life point, and it is a decision that you have to make. And there's a sacrifice for everyone, male and female. When you have a family, you either stay at sea and stay progressing your career, and you sacrifice time at home with your family, or and you are slightly restricted as well. You may not progress quite as fast. There's those things to take into consideration. And then there's the other side, that you sacrifice the idea of having a family, and I know women that have chosen not to have a family and pursue careers. So it's a very difficult situation for all, but we should recognize that there's life points, for different people, that people will go through some life point around that, and put in place frameworks around how we can support them, whatever they choose, male or female, to do. It's quite important. For me, I chose to go to ferries from cruise because it wasn't a viable option at the time to work 4 months on, 2 months off, and have babies. I wasn't senior enough to take my kids on board. Now things have changed a huge amount, and there's lots of things being looked at within lots of different organisations around how people can manage family around their job. So there are changes that have happened, and some of our brands offer 10-week on, 10-week off contracts. So, and I think there's other brands around globally that do the same. I chose to do week on, week off. That's what I chose to do, and I actually felt like I didn't miss out on a huge amount with my kids growing up. I was able to see them progress every other week, so that was kind of nice. But they also still missed out on me for 6 months of the year, so that you've still got a sacrifice there somehow. And and at some point I question whether I did the right thing. Did I do the right thing? Did they miss out on not having a parent there all the time? But I think for my own sanity as well, I needed to work and keep my career going and pushing myself. And I've definitely found that work. I think going back to the retention side of things, and this is something that the industry needs to work on as a whole, and it's something that won't happen without globally us all I think we all recognize there's a challenge there with women being mothers and staying at sea. And also there is a bit of challenge around fathers as well. They want, they also want to have that same experience of being at home with their kids. As an industry, we need to work together to find solutions, because we bring in people, we put a lot of money into the training at the very beginning of their cadetships. In the UK, it's come split from governments and companies. But we almost need to have additional sort of funding at certain life points, maybe, that people can sort of look at, where they can either upskill or reskill their skills that they've learned at sea to stay in the industry, and maybe move them to another sector of the industry, or something that's more viable for a few years, or work on ways that we can keep opportunities open for people to return once they've got to the point of that life period that they then want to return into the industry. And there's still so many blocks, even around certification and revalidation, and maintaining 12 months sea time over a 5-year period. If you stop to have 2 or 3 kids, that becomes incredibly difficult to maintain that sea time. So there's lots of things that need to be sort of looked at, really, but it's only going to work if we do it together as a global community.
No, absolutely. And I know people and have heard stories, of where, like you were saying, the woman's decided, I want the career, and the man has decided that he'll be the one, to be more of a stay-at-home father. And I think as a community, as a world, we just need to be more open to that. And it's based on personal circumstances. And I think choosing to have your career should not feel shameful on some women, which I think it is, because then some people may judge and think, oh, you're choosing your career over your family. But I think you are such a good example of balancing it out, because you owe it to yourself, didn't you, to pursue your career and continue your career, but also you've been an incredible mother, an incredible figure to your children. And I think, when your kids do look back when they're older, they will recognize and appreciate how hard you work to ensure you struck that balance. We're all very much, because of our passion in that retention, I think we also naturally think of, well, how can we also attract more people into our sector? I don't know if there's anything pressing on your mind in terms of what we can do with that. Again, I think a key point is collaboration, working with different organizations, that sharing of knowledge and being vocal in the right way, of course. But I think sharing that knowledge is so important. But how can we best now attract more people into the industry, retaining those, like we've said, with those transferable skills? But how can we attract more people? Because we're in such an incredible industry. It's so transformative in itself. There are so many challenges, I'll say, but they're exciting challenges ahead. And to be part of kind of that piece on the sustainability, decarbonisation, inclusion, all of that coming together, what an exciting time it is to be in our industry. So what can we do to bring more people in? And it doesn't have to necessarily be those in their early careers, but what about those, later in their careers, who decide, I want a change, I want to be part of something international and transformative? Enter maritime.
Maritime is a great area. And like you just said, there's a huge amount of skills needed within the industry, not just on the deck and technical side. There's other areas within the industry that we need people that are experts or subject matter experts on. I think for a start, it involves talking about, like, getting people out there and talking about it. Podcasts like this, and any opportunities where we can showcase what a great career you can have within the industry. I mean, who wouldn't want to go out on out to sea and wake up with beautiful sunrise every morning, and across calm oceans, stormy oceans even as well sometimes.
No, exactly. And who doesn't want, like, from my perspective, I've been to some incredible cities and places where there've been, these large industry trade events, for example, or client meetings, or opportunities to support with public relations, comms and marketing. the places I've even traveled to, and I haven't worked at sea, but I'm part of the maritime industry. And even that in itself, again, listeners, another big incentive, but it's the
No, it
opportunity to
is.
collaborate with all these different people and to see more of the world. Yeah, there's incredible things just within that.
Yeah, I think for me, the drive to go to sea was about travel, working with, you know, different cultures, seeing,
So,
you know, food, different food from different countries.
see,
It was
yes,
like got pockets of places that, you know, there's that incentive as a young person to go to sea and experience that opportunity to travel and get paid for doing it. I suppose the reality is you're not in ports for very long, so and you're trying to get off the ship in between shifts and stuff, so you don't get maybe to see as much as you'd like, but it gives you an idea of where you can go back to later. My kids have been really lucky. They've seen, I think my youngest said he's been to 18 countries. That opportunity for me, I think, you know, early part of my career, and I've counted it up, I've been to 118 countries. Okay, ports in different, you know, but I've been lucky enough to go ashore. So for me, the driving factor is to, you know, showcase, you know, the opportunities to travel. But even in my job shoreside now, I still travel a lot for work. You know, like you said, I do get to do travel, mainly European, but I've been to the States a couple of times as well. And it's a fantastic way of, even if you just, you know, spend 5 hours to see a little bit of the world. And my experience a couple of weeks ago in LA, we finished work at like 4 in the afternoon, and then we had a sort of 5 hour window where we went and did a backlot studio tour. We went to In-N-Out Burger, and where did we else go? Oh, we went to the Boulevard, like, you know, where the, you know, and walked to the strip on Broadway. You know, we did that in 5 hours. Okay, it wasn't like loads, but it just that we spent a bit of our own time in the evening just getting out and seeing where we were at before we then got on flights back. But you know, that's, you know, the bonus bits of it, if you can find that time and get out. With regards to attracting people, it really does need role models. I think that's the main thing. People that are going to speak about their career with passion and tell other people what a great industry this is to come into. And that's, you know, it is a lot of promotion probably from companies, from, you know, within the industry as a whole, to showcase what careers there are to offer. Well, you've got, and I found out at Carnival UK the other day, and I don't have one to show you, but we've got these cards, and it basically said, I studied this, and it says this is what you can do in the maritime industry or within our brands, and it's got like a list of jobs that people can do, and it covers every subject from geography, IT, PE. I thought it was incredibly good work actually, and it's that sort of stuff that needs to be put out there to show, you know, what they, you know, or I've done this job, what can I do in the maritime industry? Those sort of things need to be sort of put out there, with people saying this is how I changed careers, this is what I did. So I think there's a lot around having people speak about their
absolutely.
experience.
And we do need the diverse thinking as well. And sometimes we need to take, you know, inspiration and knowledge from other sectors and bring that into ours. So that's why we also welcome those who are, you know, 10 years into their career. You know, they could be working, yes, in a marketing role or in technology or IT or research. They could be scientists, but we need all of that in our sector because, you know, we are developing new fuels. We are developing efficiency technologies. We need data, we need asset management companies, we need people at sea to help
Absolutely.
operate 90% of trade, which is transported via ships. So people, call to action, join us.
It's a big call
And
to action.
and I really like what you said about, you know, having those role models, and that comes from, you know, personal role models and company role models too. There's so much that companies can be doing, many like Carnival that are, because they've got people like you on the inside pushing that agenda. And yeah, we need more of that, and there is so many great examples, and it's just continuing that momentum, isn't it? I did want to ask you, Louise, what are your kind of key motivations? And I know we spoke about it before in terms of that, if you had the power to change something, like what would it be? But it'd be really interesting to hear of your key motivations and like what you'd like to see from the sector.
So I think in my current role as Fleet Captain and Director of Maritime Standards, my journey into this position has been sort of quite serendipitous getting here. And so I've taken the role of I was fleet manager for safety for a while. So I think my motivations are really driven by sort of a desire to help people and ensure safety and make sure that people feel included. And I think those are my key areas. So I'm really, like, again, like I think we've talked about a lot on this, I'm really, really motivated and passionate about mentoring and supporting others and making sure that they have the opportunities that I had. And I think, there's some challenges, there's lots of different cultures on the ship, and it's recognizing that we're all human basically at the end of the day, and we've all got one job to do. But yeah, my main motivation is around inclusivity and safety, and it's exactly what I got that Merchant Navy medal for, and ensuring their welfare on board and making sure that everyone's sort of thriving, I guess, or has opportunities to thrive.
And I really, again, like what you said, and I hope that I one day do this too, because I have been given amazing opportunities. In tandem, I have created them for myself, though, because I recognize no one else is going to do it for me. I need to be curious. I need to ask the questions. I need to get myself in a position that enables me to get to that next step, to what I want to become. But I also do want to ensure that accessibility is open to others as well. And that's, something for me personally that I will be working on going forward. And I know, but, even with Blue, we are such an inclusive organization. We're a 50-50 split of men and women. And again, out of my curiosity, though, there's so much accessible to me. And it's because the company is so open and flexible to enabling that for us. So that's, such a progressive part of being here. And I did just want to ask you, though, in terms of safety, because obviously this is a big area and we haven't really touched upon it today. There's obviously, again, there's a lot of regulation that does come in. There are great examples of companies that are really pushing that agenda. We do have a lot of charities out there as well supporting seafarers particularly. But is there any more we need to be doing, Louise, with the safety part in our sector? How can we really also be supporting well-being of people at sea? Your experience is so fascinating, and you've definitely enabled yourself and put yourself in really good positions. Some people maybe don't have as easy a time with it, especially when we were experiencing COVID-19. I mean, I could not have done what those seafarers did. But is there any more we can be doing in terms of the safety and well-being aspects?
Yeah, definitely. I think safety is constantly about, within safety culture, it's around continuous improvement and making sure that that people are heard, but also that the leadership is driving the right message as well, and leading by their actions. And so for me, it's really just encouraging. And the chamber, the UK Chamber of Shipping have done a huge amount of work around safety culture. They, and they've got a working group on it, and they're just doing their safety culture conference, I think around this time this year. I think there's a lot that we can learn. I think biggest thing is learning from other, talking to other companies. There's no real competition around safety. We just want to make sure that people get to work safely and go home safely. And I think it's getting them to understand that. But the key to it is really getting individuals to understand and own their own personal safety. So the other thing around safety, obviously you touched on sort of well-being, there's obviously that mental safety aspect as well. And again, having tools in place within companies to support and onboard ships to support the crew and the teams on board is vital to making sure that they operate safely, because if they feel safe or their well-being safe, they've got a safe feeling of well-being, then they tend to be more efficient, more effective and safer in the workplace, and they'll be looking out for their teams as well. And that's the other thing, by creating good teamwork and good team creation on board, it gives that sort of sense of looking out for your teammates. So there's a huge, I think it's just a continual process, and it just needs to be keep messaging around that and making sure that everyone keeps operating safely on board.
And I think that's our key takeaways of today, isn't it? It's talking and communicating about these issues, challenges, opportunities, sharing that knowledge. It's listening to all those around you, and no matter what ranking they are, no matter what company, what part of the industry they're in, we all need to be really aware of listening to others and, thinking then, how can I do something about this? How can I turn that into maybe more of a positive, or how can I support that person or the wider industry? And again, that's why I adore our sector so much, though, because I think there are so many of us thinking that way. And it's just such an incredible community to be part of. And I just want to thank you so much for joining me today. Do you have any final closing remarks that you'd wish to share with our listeners?
I think it would just be really good to sort of like just go back to sort of how, like, the retention piece. That's kind of like, I would just really like to see some movement in that area going forward, and we're willing to sort of work with people to sort of share my experiences to help make changes for others going forward, because I think that, you know, everyone should be given sort of accessibility to this industry and being able to sort of maintain their careers. So that if like I could change one thing or be part of a change going forward, would be that movement of sort of, you know, giving people the opportunity to sail as captain eventually, if that's what they wanted to do when they were a 9-year-old girl. So because I got to do it, and I'd like to see others do it if that's what their dream is. So I think it is really just about empowering people to get to that point and where they can achieve those dreams, but being able to support them along the way. So yeah, I'm willing to support the industry going forward and help.
Louise, you are such an incredible leader, mentor, and advocate. I'm so grateful to know you and to call you a friend. And I know that I could pick up the phone at any time of day, talk to you about anything. And I know you and I could talk for hours on these sorts of. We really could. We're both chatterboxes.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for joining today and for sharing your story and this incredible insight. This has been the Blue Communications People Podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage on our channels. Louise, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.